Hi everyone, I'm Lori Frost. I'm here with
Andy Bondi.
Andy Bondi. Welcome to our first PECS user support Facebook live streaming event, and it's actually Andy's and my first live streaming event, so appreciate you all joining us. I just wanted to give you a quick overview of our format for the afternoon. We'll be live streaming for an hour. For those of you who can't stay the whole hour, we are recording it and we'll post the full recording. We'll post the video when we're done today. Several of you responded to our query for topics for today, so we've kind of prioritized a lot of your responses. We're going to address 3 brief topics this afternoon and then open up the forum for questions from you all. So if you want to pose your questions throughout this hour, that's fine. We do have Raina Bondi here who will be accumulating those questions for us. So, ready?
Sure.
Okay. One of the common questions we get at some of our PECS workshops, and one of the questions that we see a lot on the Facebook PECS user support page, is regarding motivating team members to participate in PECS implementation. Sometimes we hear from parents who say, I'm doing it at home, but school's not doing it. Sometimes we hear from schools, I'm doing it in my classroom, but I can't get the rest of the team to do it, or it's not happening at home also. So Andy's going to start us off with some comments about that.
Well, one of the issues and challenges is when one group of people thinks another group is not going to follow through. So why should I do it? So sometimes the team at home is doing PECS and they're saying, well, why should we do it? The school isn't doing it. Sometimes we've heard of a school doing it and saying, well, should we do it because the parents aren't doing it or the group home isn't doing it? A number of years ago, we used to do frequent visits to a program in Lima, Peru, the Ann Sullivan program. And from the early 90s, they did a wonderful job of implementing PECS for their students and teaching parents to implement it. Their attitude was if the parents don't learn how to effectively interact with the children, that there's just so much we can do at school. So they did a lot of training with parents, but then they would monitor what was going on. Were the parents actually following through with doing PECS at home, or was it just being really pushed at school? And what they found was when children were doing PECS only at school, they did learn, but it was about half the rate of what happened when both parents and school were promoting PECS.
So when it was being done in all environments.
So when it was done in all environments and properly implemented in all environments, that's what maximized learning. But kids did make steady progress if they only were doing it at school. So we always advise people, don't give up yourself because you're not sure what the other group is going to do. Keep on pushing and providing support for new skills. The other issue is really, what tends to motivate staff? And sometimes we hear, well, I know what he wants, so I'm just going to give him a cookie. He always has a snack for him, I'm just going to give him a snack. And why should I teach him to initiate? He might ask when I'm not ready. And they see that as a problem. What they don't realize is that we really cannot anticipate all the situations where students, learners, people that live with us want things or motivated by things. And if we don't teach that initiation, then it falls totally on us to read the situation. And no one can read somebody else's situation as well as they can. So teaching that initiation is crucial. So one of the things that I've sometimes suggested is it's like count how hard the parents and staff are working. You might go into a classroom and somebody's saying, what do you want? What do you want? What do you want? What do you want? And working really hard to get the kid to respond. If they had put all that effort into teaching initiation, their life would be easier. You see the same thing for parents, that instead of trying to anticipate everything, if parents see what happens when children can initiate their own requests and sometimes their own activities, then their life is actually easier, not harder.
One of the questions addressed to us was, when one person on the team goes to PECS training and is expected to go back to the team and spread the news, are there any tools or tricks or quick trainings that we can recommend? One that I would start off with is for people who are new to PECS. If you go to our YouTube channel, which is PECS Global, we do have it's about a 45-minute overview of PECS. It's called A Clear Picture. And it's a nice introduction to what PECS is. And again, this is for people who are new to something like PECS. It's not a training video. It's an overview video. And there are videos in the video, in the presentation, of kids learning to use the first couple phases of PECS. But that's one way to get everybody on the team at least knowledgeable about the PECS protocol. One other issue I wanted to bring up too was essentially related to team issues in an educational setting, whether that's at school or in the community or at home, and how I think there needs to be a pretty high level of interprofessional collaboration to get everybody understanding that everybody can be can intervene with communication training. So it's not just the role of the speech pathologist to do communication training, but sometimes what that also involves is a little bit of role release. So as a speech pathologist, I used to be the one who controlled the entire boardmaker disc in my school, and nobody was allowed to use it because it was a rare and expensive commodity. So that kind of meant I was the one responsible for making all the pictures and implementing all of PECS. Pictures are easy to make nowadays. That shouldn't be an issue. But what that reminds me of too is I do a lot of consulting in schools in New Jersey, and what I'm running into is the issue of speech pathologists who have caseloads of 40, 50, 60, 70, and this year one speech pathologist who has a caseload of 85 kids in a K through 5 school, and 12 to 15 of those kids are kids who are on the spectrum and are going to be using something like PECS or AAC. We can't, as the speech pathologist, can't be the only one implementing PECS. It's not going to have any kind of salient impact on the kids. So if it was the speech pathologist who went to the training and has to come back and implement it, I'm fine with implementing it as that one person who went to training in a kind of controlled environment, but I want to make sure that everybody has access to what I'm doing during that controlled environment. So if I can videotape it and share that with everybody, that would be great. Other strategies or other avenues for accessing more information on how to implement PECS. Of course, this user support group is a great place to start. Our website, PECS.com, there's lots of information on the website. And if you are the one person in your environment who went to the training, sometimes I get questions from people too. I'm expected to go back and now do an in-service for my staff at school so that everybody is now able to implement the PECS protocol. I think that's a tall order to give to the one person who's going to the PECS training. In a perfect world, we like to have whole teams come to the training, or we like to train entire groups of staff from a particular environment. So quick summary, I really want the one person who's doing it to be able to implement it with fidelity in a controlled, structured environment, and then share that kind of information with everybody else. To me, the difficult parts of PECS training are initially in phase 1, identifying the reinforcers, and that's where we need a lot of team input. That doesn't have to be in person. I can send out an email to everybody saying, what are some potential reinforcers for this? But as we all know from seeing some of the videos, and one of them that you'll see in particular from our Clear Picture webinar on our website, PECS phase 1 can be very, very fast, and that's when we require the most intense training at the beginning of the protocol. So if one person does that, well, actually PECS phase 1 requires 2 people. So if 2 people are involved in that, and the student does really, really well, it doesn't require a high level of training or attendance at our 2-day workshop for other people to be able to follow through with phase 1 of training. Anything to add?
Well, I think what everybody has to remember is that most professionals are pretty good at identifying that if they want students, children to learn, that involves changing what they do. So it's not about just talking to somebody, hey, you have to give me the picture, and anytime you want something, just give me the picture, and then the child will say, oh, okay, here, pictures. Obviously, learning from the child's point of view involves doing. Well, the same is true for staff development. There are a lot of skills that are necessary to implement PECS. The PECS manual in every chapter about every phase has data sheets on what are the specific skills that the teachers are supposed to use. Then, rather than just having another conversation about PECS, the key is to practice the specific skills. What does the communicative partner do? What does the physical prompter do? When do we speak? When is it not a good idea to speak? These are not what I call beer conversations at the end of the day. These are things that you need to practice doing. Even for those who go to the 2-day workshop, and we do practice within the workshop, I certainly tell everybody, you have not practiced enough. We cannot give you enough time in the 2-day workshop to practice all the skills you need to do. So the key is to have the teams, everyone who's going to implement PECS, get involved. Now, maybe not everyone on the team is doing phase 1. Maybe phase 1 for a lot of kids happens very quickly, and you decide to have a core team start off phase 1. But part of phase 2 is interacting with different people in different environments about different interesting things. Then everybody has to know how to respond. And so the key is that there are guidelines in the manual, there are guidelines we provided the workshop, but those are guidelines for staff to practice, not just talk about.
Good job. High five. Okay. For those of you just joining us, send us out a hello so we can actually, in your comment section, so we have Lily and Iona and Ann. Ann is joining us from Richardson, Texas, with all the attendees at one of her PECS Level 1 workshops. Robin, hello. Flavia, hello. And one other point I wanted to make about motivating all the team members and making sure that PECS happens across the day is the chapter in the PECS manual devoted to the additional 9 critical, well, all of the 9 critical communication skills, and the chapter in the manual about teaching PECS across the day. Sometimes it's difficult for me as a school speech pathologist to envision, well, what could be happening in the cafeteria? I don't ever go into the cafeteria. What are potential communicative opportunities in the cafeteria? If I don't have the option of going into the home, I don't know that how I would be able to identify some specific training opportunities in the home or PECS opportunities. So there are lots of handouts in the chapter in the manual on teaching PECS across the day that are really helpful for team planning meetings and making sure that everybody in the building or everybody in the child's environment is able to at least respond when a child hands them a picture.
I think it also helps to sometimes envision what would undermine PECS. What could we do that would lead to really poor acquisition by a child? Well, clearly, if the staff weren't trained well, that would undermine it. But if we sat there at a single table with 2 chairs and the same piece of candy and just go trial after trial requesting that piece of candy day after day with the same 2 people, that would be a really good way to undermine PECS. We have been in some places where they do pretty good implementation, but they only do it at snack time and lunchtime. I call that the edible exchange communication system. It is not for the child to suddenly realize, wait a minute, I could ask for toys? I could ask to go outside? It's not the child's responsibility to generalize. It's our responsibility to teach generalization. So when we see teams that are poorly motivated, very often they have not been pushed to be creative. Where can you get PECS into interesting environments with a kid doing interesting things? So that's one of the things that we would suggest promoting. Have those discussions as a group in school, any other kind of setting with the parents, and look for those creative environments.
Robin Miller, thank you for your comment. You're a BCBA working with families in the home. How do you get schools to implement? I think it's kind of the reverse of some of the strategies Andy and I've been talking about. I'm assuming that if you're working with the child in the home, you have some kind of correspondence or interaction with the school staff. And to me, that's got to be kind of a grassroots approach to starting to get this going in the school. But what I'm finding is in public schools and actually in private schools too, there might be school policies or district policies or administrative policies about what we do and what we don't do in the school. Sometimes it's a simple issue of planning time. I don't have time as a school-based speech pathologist or as a teacher in a public school to meet with the staff because I have kids all day. If you can open up a dialogue, an electronic dialogue, I have found that to be very, very helpful. The other issue too is the IEP process. I'm hoping that people who are working with the kids in the home are able to participate in the planning of the annual program or the annual goals set up for a child. And if that's the case, then if we have specific goals written on functional communication, the ability to ask for preferred items, that's something then that is going to be essentially legally mandated to happen in the schools.
Again, let's parallel some of the analysis, if you will, to what do we know about working with a child that we just meet. For example, I mean, if somebody brings a child to my room, the first thing I want to know is, what is he or she like? Yeah, I would like the child to listen to me, but that's going to come later. What is he like? How do I convince him that I'm a really nice person and you can get the stuff you like when you're around me? Then the lessons start. Well, the issue is when I start working with a new team, a new school, a new district, I need to do the same type of motivational analysis. What are they motivated by? And it's not, oh, we want the best for all children. It has to be more individualized. When somebody says, there's resistance, then what is the fear? Many times the fear is because of something that happened in the past. They got sued for trying something. Somebody else in the district got sued. There are districts where a good day is there are no lawsuits. Well, that's a different motivation than a good day is 20 kids learn to spontaneously communicate today. So I need to individualize my assessment when I work with different teams. What's going to motivate them? What are the potential barriers to implementing PECS? And then how do we mutually get involved in that to simply, say, well, this is what the child needs. They'll just look at you and say, no, I think you need something else. And you won't get at the core issues that way.
I just forgot what I was going to say. It was really, really earth-shattering and important, but I totally forgot. So go on, Andy.
I just want to...
Oh, I remember.
See, I knew I could help.
Behavior analyst, you're the experts at motivating people. So if you're the behavior analyst on the team having trouble motivating the rest of the team, I understand sometimes it's an administrative issue. Like Robin, you said PECS is not viewed as least restrictive environment. We could talk for days on that because I don't agree with that. But one of the things I have found really to be really motivating is a running videotape of the child at home or in school that goes back and forth between everybody, obviously with the right approval from everybody who needs to have approval, but kind of a video log that goes back and forth so that we can see progress, because I don't know of any educator who does not find progress on the part of the student motivating. Okay.
Yep. We have hellos from, well, you said Romania, we have Japan now, and
France.
Nora from France, Italy, California. It's almost like a new country.
Okay. And one of the next common themes that we ran into in your questions, and it's a prevalent theme on the PECS User Support Facebook page, were issues with regard to discrimination training. And discrimination training is phase 3 of the PECS protocol. And remember, phase 3 is divided into 2 components. The initial skill that we're teaching is high preferred versus a non-preferred, or non-conditional, non-conditional discrimination. We speech pathologists call it discrimination.
Just stay there.
Okay. And I wanted to address a couple of what I find to be stumbling blocks for some of my kids. Somebody said that they have a student who can do a high preferred versus a blank, but anytime we start trying to incorporate a true picture on what we call the distractor item, the student falls apart. My first response to that is always make sure that there's not a vision issue, because what the kids might be doing is looking for that white piece of paper that has information on it versus the white piece of paper that doesn't have information on it, and that would be an example of the highly preferred versus the blank. I want to make sure there's no vision issues that might be contributing to this poor discrimination skills or poor discrimination outcome. The next thing I'm going to look at is, I'm sure many of you have run into kids who tend to, in phase 1, find the picture through feeling, not through looking. So one of the things that we've started kind of modifying in our latest workshops is making sure that people way back in phase 1 are making sure that the child is actually looking before picking up the picture, reaching, and releasing. So we talk about the 3-step task analysis: pick up, reach, and release. We actually have a pre-step, so it could technically be a 4-step task analysis, which is look, pick up, reach, and release. If you've made sure that the student is looking way back in phase 1 of training, I find discrimination tends to have fewer stumbling blocks, because sometimes those stumbling blocks take the form of the student just reaching for and touching and exchanging whatever picture his hand encounters first on the PECS book. So make sure the students are actually looking at the pictures on the PECS book. Sorry, we just lost our connection for a second. And one of the ways I will do that is through target practice. If this is my PECS book and I have 2 pictures on it, as the student is reaching for the picture, I'm moving the book around so that he is, and I'm not going to allow him to take one of the pictures until I see his eyes directed at one of the 2 pictures. The next thing I will try is bigger pictures farther apart, and we do talk about these strategies at our level 1 and our level 2 training.
Let me just clarify one way of thinking about it. If, when I begin to introduce discrimination, and the child is not looking at the pictures, as Lori says, his hands are doing the looking, you can also clean up that look and reach in phase 2. That is, you can do that with one single picture. And again, as the book moves around, the child still has to localize, and you're not teasing, you're not saying, oh, can you get the picture? You're just trying to work on scanning before reaching. So if you saw in phase 2 a child was reliably handing over pictures, but many times it's with its head is averted, I would want to make sure that you really build in the look before you move to phase 3 on discrimination. Otherwise, you're going to guarantee errors right off the bat.
Yes. The other element in phase 3A is, because it's a high preferred and a non-preferred, essentially it's the outcome of giving one picture versus another that should motivate the student to, across trials, give the correct picture. So I try to remind people too, we call it high preferred versus non-preferred because we really are looking for a non-preferred. I find the students who have the best success in phase 3A are the students who really do have that rejection response when they give me the incorrect picture and I try and give them the incorrect item. I've had students I call the polite kids. They'll take and just kind of put down to the side something that they don't want. I want to have a really overt, not violent or painful reaction to seeing that, to receiving the non-preferred item, because then the motivation is going to be much stronger on the next trial to get the picture correct the first time.
Yeah, I think also when we talk about big pictures far apart, that I have found that too many people are constrained by the size of the communication book. So the communication book opens up and, well, the pictures could be just as far apart as the edge of the book. Well, that's just not true. They don't have to be pictures on a book to begin. They can be pictures on a big table and much further apart. So the child literally has to walk in one direction versus another. So don't feel the book constrains that issue of big pictures far apart. Why big pictures? Why do we suggest starting with bigger pictures? Because typically the visual field, if you will, captures the action better. So if you have a tiny picture and a big picture in front of children, they will tend to scan the bigger picture first. And if they're scanning it first, the hand tends to follow where the eye is going. So again, be a little creative, but once this strategy works, the key is then you have to start changing the strategy. The pictures have to gradually get smaller and closer. The key is, are you prepared to make those changes after you figure out how to help the child?
And one final point about Phase 3A, we talk to people around the world about this, and we talk to our consultants around the world. And I actually did a survey a couple of years ago from our 50-plus consultants around the world, their experience in watching other people implement PECS. Where do they see high rates of implementer errors? One of them was at Phase 3, and that was probably the highest ranking from all of our consultants around the world, was 2 errors being made in Phase 3, Phase 3A. One of them was not reinforcing within a half second the new behavior. And the new behavior in Phase 3A is choosing the correct picture, and we have to be able to reinforce at the moment of that choice. So it says the child's reaching for the picture, the moment he commits to one picture versus the other, that's when we have to be providing that reinforcement. And we always talk about making that reinforcement some kind of social praise, which hopefully you've been pairing with access to the picture from Phase 1 and Phase 2. The second error that we tend to see is with the 4-step error correction procedure. So if you're not comfortable with your 4-step error correction procedure, go back to the PECS manual or to your handout from a workshop, or find somebody who's good at it and make sure you're implementing the 4-step error correction procedure with lots of fidelity. Now, a couple of you have also asked about the issue of will PECS inhibit the development of speech? Globally speaking, what we know about AAC in general from research going back into the late 70s is that AAC in general does not inhibit the development of speech. And what we know about PECS specifically, and you can access a lot of this research on our website, is that PECS not only doesn't inhibit the development of speech, that for our kids who are 7 and younger, it's more likely to result in or be correlated with the development of speech.
The other way to frame it is that for 40 or 50 years, people have looked for this inhibitory effect of AAC on speech, and there are no publications demonstrating that it undermines the development of speech or stops the development of speech in somebody who has a little bit. So one of the things that I always remind professionals is, if you're going to talk to a staff for the first time about PECS or to a parent, don't wait for them to say to you, but I'm worried about speech. I mean, you know they're worried about speech. So I always advise you should bring up the topic. It's, our line in America is, there's the elephant in the room, so we might as well talk about it. So you should raise the issue. You should just look at mom or the parent, I mean the teacher, and just say, I know what you're worried about. You're worried that if we use pictures, your child won't develop speech, and then go from there. The key is that many people have had that fear. You are not the first parent to have that fear, and here's what we know from the research. Will that completely alleviate the fear? The answer is no. Because there are a lot of people say, well, but my child is different and I'm still afraid of it. So what we then have to do is have a separate conversation of what are the things we're going to do, especially for the very young children, to help promote vocalization. And it's from vocalization that we can eventually shape up speech. That is, if you don't start vocalizing, you're not going to have words to say later on.
And when in PECS do we see vocalization?
Well, the research shows that the most likely phase of PECS to get vocalization started is in phase 4, once we introduce the delayed prompt, the delaying between the first picture and the sentence strip and the second.
When we're reading it back.
When we're reading it back. So, I want biscuit. And 5 seconds is a long, painful time for a lot of people, but you have to understand the research shows it takes 4 or 5 seconds of delay. Doing a 1 second delay is not going to be effective. There was an interesting article last year where somebody was doing some time delay like that in phase 2, between essentially handing over, when the child handed over the picture, the adult would say the word and then hold on to the item for 5 more seconds. And there were some encouraging results. But again, our concern is if you start to focus on encouraging vocalization in phase 2, in phase 3, you may still be getting some new vocalizations while you're working on a new skill. And this is where I see people have trouble with, the fundamental rule in teaching is 1 lesson at a time. If I'm doing a lesson, I'm trying to teach you what to do with the picture, then what your mouth is doing is secondary. If I am working on getting you to vocalize, then what you do with the picture is secondary. So again, I think we have to continue to watch people trying to look at strategies within phase 2, and then look if it's undermining what's going on in phase 3. I think some of the kids who are rolling along super fast may not matter. But for some of the kids who are going to have difficulty in discrimination, trying to work on vocalization before discrimination and then have a new problem when you get to discrimination, you might lose both. You might lose both, working with the pictures and vocalizing because I'm having such a tough time with discrimination. So right now, I would personally continue to follow the protocol, but keep aware of what research is indicating.
Okay. Moving on to the next topic, and that is high-tech devices, iPads, or other higher, more expensive devices. We do teach a full-day workshop on transitioning from PECS to speech-generating devices, and to me that should be noticed to everybody that we do think that many of our students will transition from PECS to a speech-generating device. We have guidelines that we have listed on our website on when to transition and how to transition, and those guidelines and the how to transition are topics that we cover in our one-day transitioning from PECS to speech-generating device workshop. The next point I want to make is that it is related to kids developing speech when they're using PECS. The numbers that we've seen are with our kids who are young and using PECS for 9 months to a year or longer and who've gotten through phase 4, those are the kids that are most likely to develop speech. And the numbers run around 75 to 80% of these kids do develop speech and no longer need PECS. So right then and there, for our really young kids, those are kids who aren't going to be transitioning because they're now talking. So we're back to 15, 20, 25% of those little kids who then we might start considering whether to transition to a speech-generating device. My preference, And people have told me it's because I am the PECS lady. My preference is to always start low tech, because what we're doing within PECS is teaching the kids how to communicate. And we're not burdening them with some of the demands of navigating in an iPad or a speech generating device of some kind. When we transition to a speech generating device, it's usually after the kids have mastered phase 4 of the PECS protocol. And for those of you doing PECS, you know that can be a couple of months, it can be a couple of years, depending upon on the student's acquisition of the various phases. Because if you think about the skills the child has mastered, by the time he's finished phase 4 of the PECS protocol, he can exchange a picture, which means he knows to go get somebody to do something to somebody else in order to get access to something that he really, really wants. That's the nature of communication, even for typically developing kids. So I want to make sure that skill is in place before I transition to something else. What's unique about PECS is the exchange, the physical exchange. And the physical exchange is different than pushing a button. I can sit in a room by myself and push a button. I can push a button when someone's next to me with no intent to impact their behavior. Or I can push a button thinking maybe something will happen. I don't know when the child is new to communication intervention. So I'm going to start with a strategy that ensures social approach and social interaction. That's what the kids are mastering in phase 1 of PECS. In phase 2, they're mastering persistence. And we always say I like our kids to be able to start nagging us, because essentially what we're doing is increasing the response effort on the part of the child. You either have to walk farther to get to me, you have to reach farther, you have to carry your pictures with you. If I have a student who's that persistent at communicating, when I increase the response effort even more by putting an electronic device in front of him, I'm pretty sure he's going to be continuing to be motivated to communicate with the new modality. Phase 3 is when the kids learn to discriminate pictures. And one of the strategies we do in phase 3A is we move the pictures around on the PECS book or in the PECS book. Because what we're teaching is picture discrimination, not location discrimination. And unless you have an app that you can lock and unlock the editing function of, it's really hard to move the pictures around on a device, whether you're using TouchChat, Proloquo, any of the most frequently used apps that I see. I want to make sure my kids have mastered picture discrimination, not location discrimination, when we do the transition. And in phase 4, kids are learning to build picture sentences. I want the student to have multiple step requests, which involve getting the book, putting the I want picture on the strip, the reinforcer picture on the strip, removing the strip, finding the communicative partner, exchanging the strip, and doing the nice touch while we read back the strip. That's a multi-step sequence to get a cookie. And I guarantee there will be even more steps involved when you transition to a speech generating device, unless you're using a single grid display. So go ahead.
I'm going to add a perspective that I'm not even sure Lori has heard me talk about this line, so we'll do something new here. Number one of the issues is, like, what are the prerequisites, okay, for moving to an SGD? And again, we think it's a transitional issue. So one of the issues is, especially for the young children, why, after starting on PECS, is this particular child not speaking? Okay, from our earliest observations, the very first publication back in '94, we found 85% of the children who started PECS at 5 years and younger were vocalizing within a year and a half. Okay, of the children who were not vocalizing, the most significant factor was the level of cognitive impairment. So there were relatively few children whose vocabulary kept expanding, but were not vocalizing. But one of the issues is, why is the child not vocalizing? It is possible that staff are not using really good strategies to promote vocalization. It's not just the delayed prompt strategy.
You need a speech pathologist.
Well, actually, what I'm going to say is going to go in a different direction.
No, you don't.
There was a comment by Bethan about the BCBAs and what they know, and I've seen this big shift to behavior analysts focusing on stimulus-stimulus pairing, which, again, obviously there's research showing it's effective, although how robust and long-lasting is an interesting question. But what a lot of people are now not looking at is what Ivar Lovaas developed many, many years ago. What Lovaas did, and he lays it out brilliantly in several different books, is essentially try to entertain the child, tickle the child, play with the child, surprise the child, throw them up in the air, do anything you can to get vocalizations going. Any vocalization will be reinforced. From my field, it's called a free operant. Just get vocalizations up. Then try to capture control, meaning try to get him to imitate the sounds he's already making. Everyone knows, including the speech pathologist, you cannot imitate a sound you have not made before. Okay, so you only can imitate what you've already done. So Lovaas would get a lot of sounds going, get the child to learn to imitate those sounds, put those sounds together, et cetera, et cetera. It is a brilliant way to move from no vocalizations to some vocalizations to spoken words. Now, we think the error was simply doing that for many, many months without working on functional communication. But remember, just like PECS is not an either or thing, it's not speech or PECS. It is how do we get functional communication going immediately? PECS is the best avenue for that. And at the same time, how do we promote vocalization? So I wish a lot of the BCBAs would go back and look at the literature, look at some of the things Lovaas described, and realize that those are very effective strategies too.
Yes. And today's not the forum for talking about what we transition to, what app or what device. But what I wanted to point out a key word that Andy and I've been using, and that is transition. We don't simply take PECS away and replace it with a device or an app. There's a period of time during which we're transferring the skills that the student has learned within PECS to what he can do on the device. And during that transition time, the kids have to have access to their PECS books. So what the day the device comes in or the app is downloaded doesn't mean that's the day you put the PECS book away. It's the day you start the transition process. And that process, depending upon the app you're using, can be quick, and depending on the student, it can be quick, or it can be really, really arduous if it's a device that requires lots and lots and lots of steps to be able to say, I want to eat a biscuit.
And, you know, I encourage people to jump up and down and scream and shout that taking skills away during a transition, whether it's from PECS to speech or PECS to a device or a device to speech, taking skills away during a transition is unethical. And part of your professional responsibilities for the professionals out there is to protect the children. We don't let people tape kids' mouths shut. We don't let them tie little signing fingers so they can't sign anymore. And we don't let anybody take PECS away in hopes that he's going to talk or immediately use a device.
Lisa, you're joining us from Ontario with issues, describing issues with regard to kids being discharged or not seen anymore or not expected to use PECS anymore if they're not making progress. And I think the benchmark you listed was if they're not mastering PECS phases in less than 6 months. That's concerning to me. That's alarming to me. I would encourage you to contact our Canadian consultant, Paige Panetta, and you can access her through the PECS.com Canadian website to talk about some specific issues. And I know she has talked to us about some of those issues in Ontario in particular, but she might be able to help you with strategies that might be a little bit more easily addressed within the political and cultural issues in programs in Ontario, Canada.
And you know, if you can separately share some information about what are they viewing as mastering PECS? Is it going through the phases? Is it the number of pictures? Is it the complexity of the sentences? There are a lot of ways of evaluating successful PECS users. Or is it only that, well, he didn't acquire speech and thus he failed? we've seen people view it that way as well. So happy to look at more information from you.
One other topic related to speech generating devices, and then we'll start addressing some of your other questions, is with regard to the whole idea of core vocabulary. Core vocabulary is a huge topic in the United States now. I know it's spread to Canada. I know it's spread to parts of Europe. And first thing I want to say is, because we do PECS does not mean we are anti-core. We are all about teaching words, or in our case it would be pictures, that are on whatever core list you're using, when those concepts, those words, those objects, those actions become relevant from the point of view of the student. So we're doing a motivational analysis to determine when is it going to be relevant from my student's perspective to be able to use a picture of or a word from the core list. Now the core list is going to be dependent upon which core list you're using. Want is on the core list. Obviously we're teaching that. Want is on almost every core list that I've seen. We're teaching that in phase 4. Help is on most of the core lists. We're teaching that as early as phase 2 of the PECS protocol. We don't talk about PECS versus core. We talk about PECS and core when those core words are becoming relevant and meaningful and motivating for our students to learn. We are not, in many of the school programs where I've talked to staff in the United States, what we're seeing is a trend in taking kids off PECS and giving them a single piece of laminated paper that has core pictures on it. So kids are being essentially forced to change their modality of communication. If pictures are exchanged and now they're given a picture point board that has the 23 core words on it, or their 32 core words on it, or the 40 core words on it, whichever one you're using. Number one, if you're transitioning from exchanging a picture to pointing to a picture, there's going to be a learning curve for doing that. But I think we have to address the issues of taking skills away from the child and replacing it with a core board. I think everybody on this forum would be in agreement with this, that that's not something that we would condone or recommend. The other point I wanted to make about core vocabulary is there are some apps now that advertise themselves as core or apps with core vocabulary, or apps that use core vocabulary, or apps that teach core vocabulary. When I transition my PECS kids to, and it's usually an iPad with an app because the school is funding it, and that's cheaper than an Indie or an Accent device. But when I'm transitioning them to an app that includes core vocabulary, I'm approaching the core vocabulary on that app the same way I would approach any of the vocabulary that's going to be part of that app. And that is determining whether or not those pictures are ones that the student is actually going to be using. So here's where you need somebody on board who knows how to program or customize apps, because a lot of what we end up doing is hiding particular pictures on an app to make the field less busy for the student, learning to discriminate all the information on the screen in the app. But one of the questions I want to pose to you and have you go out and pose to everybody else is, how do you demonstrate that the words on the core vocabulary or on the core display are actually meaningful to the child? The way we teach, the way we assess that with PECS use is whether or not the children are using the pictures in a discriminative fashion.
It's not just PECS.
Any of their pictures.
Any communicative unit has meaning only if there's a contrast.
Right.
It doesn't matter what modality we're using.
So 2 of the words on the core vocabulary list that I see being given to children frequently is versus the. Now this is going to be relevant to English, but I often challenge people who are teaching the kids versus the. What's the rule for using the word versus the word the? And when I have professionals who can't immediately tell me the rule is, well, is for anything in the class. I want a cookie means any old cookie versus the cookie, which means a specific cookie. If that's tough discrimination for us to make, it's going to be even tougher for our kids to make. I think words like want and help and go are going to be relevant to our kids because those are the types of activities or items that they're wanting to access when they're early on in communication. One other comment on core vocabulary is that we do have a video on our PECS Global YouTube channel from Dr. Joe McCleary. It's a couple of years old where he's talking about our thinking on core vocabulary. And this afternoon at 3, we're releasing on our PECS Global YouTube channel part 2 of that video, which features Catherine Horton, who is our clinical director of Pyramid Educational Consultants here in the U.S. Catherine is a dually certified speech-language pathologist and behavior analyst, and she has a nice follow-up to Dr. McCleary's video. So that's being released at 3 o'clock today on our PECS Global YouTube channel.
I'm going to dumb it down for me. When I think about core vocabulary, again, we can have what I call those, theoretical beer conversations about vocabulary and content and what goes in it, or we can think about specific words. Long before I heard about core, we would definitely see some people who would teach a child from the beginning to put together the sentence, "I want cookie, please." And every single request had to end with please. And he had to put the please on the sentence. And when you would say, why are you doing that? Well, that makes him polite. And my view is he's not being polite because he doesn't use it differentially. If he uses it in every single sentence, it has no meaning. Okay? Red is red only when there's blue. Big is big only when there's little. And please is used only when, in other situations, I don't do it. When you watch typical kids who can use the word please, when they go on the playground and they're kicking the ball, throwing the ball around, they don't go, George, throw me the ball, please. They know in that situation, you don't use the word. When you go into the principal's office, you then use the word please. So that's not what people are teaching. And then I say, okay, when do typical children, how many words would a typically developing child have before they could reliably use the word please? Not just when mommy says, what do you say? The child can actually differentiate when to use the word please. And everyone tells me 300, 400, 500 words. So I go, great. When the kid has 300, 400, 500 pictures, then we'll work on please. Otherwise, we would be expecting of a child using pictures more than we expect of speaking children. And I think there is one of the issues, is who is controlling what's on the communication board.
Okay. The end. Not really. We have 7 minutes left in our formal time. If any of you want to post quick questions, I think we've been scrolling through the list of comments and we've addressed the questions that have come in during this talk. If you have other ones that you want to send to us right now, we're happy to address them, because if not, Andy and I are going to sing. Not really?
Not Andy or
We're going to sing the Wheels on the Bus. Okay. Okay, Lauren wants to know about our decision. There, I'm reading it on 2 screens now, to teach carrier phrases before verbs and attributes to clarify one-word mans. This is a hotly debated topic in small groups of PECS implementers around the world, and Andy's going to answer the question.
Well, again, the ultimate answer is that, there isn't a lot of research on this, so again, we're arguing theory. One of the problems with, if you will, what we hear, a child using the sentence strip, we hear, I want cookie. Is that what typical developing children are first saying? Is it a clear I and want? Probably not. In English, it's probably wanna. I don't know the approximations in other language. Gimme, not give me, gimme. And at the time the child is using it, wanna is not 2 words from the kid's point of view. It's a single unit. He's not cramming 2 units into one. That's the unit that he's using. So for us, for me, that I want is a unit It is not made up of two separate words. So the argument then is, well, should we modify want a cookie because later on we want to move to see a cookie, or do we want to work on other, if you will, aspects about the cookie, big cookie, little cookie, red cookie, blue cookie? In some part, like maybe it's a timing issue, but for the children who are, if you will, in my experience, that aware and responsive to attributes, putting together the sentence strip in phase 4 is really simple for them. For most of those kids, it's going to happen in a single day or two. So I'm not going to be spending a lot of time. And then after phase 4, we have that branch from both attributes and moving on to phase 5, responding to a question. So I'm trying to, like get people to give me more information about why in this particular case with this particular child, do you think movement with the attribute will be that much quicker than essentially where the I want goes? Because in the beginning, I want does not have meaning, though it won't have meaning until it contrasts with I see, I hear, etc.
And I just wanted to follow up with a quick point about verbs. We've been criticized as PECS being all about nouns, and I just wanted to say I disagree. I mean, I might be teaching my child in phase 1 of PECS to ask for swinging in a blanket, or swing, or hugs, or tickles, or blow for bubbles. I don't think we have to limit phase 1 of PECS to nouns, and maybe that's a weakness in our training or in our PECS manual, but I want you all to spread the word that we can teach verbs in phase 1 of PECS, but the verbs I do not teach in phase 1 of PECS are eat and drink. They both mean go in my mouth, and it's wonderful. And you also have to remember the issue Andy brought up of using the words in comparison to other words. Why would I teach a student to say eat cookie when there's nothing else he ever does with the cookie? Why would I teach him to say drink juice if there's nothing else he ever does with the word with juice? So if I'm going to teach eat, I have to be about a lot of things that I'm going to eat. If I'm going to teach drink, it has to be about a lot of things. But if I'm going to pair drink and juice, there's other things I also have to do with juice. So I have to make juice, pour juice, stir juice, spill juice, clean up juice, all of those things with regard to juice, making sure that there's lots and lots of discrimination.
Going back to Lori's initial point, the issue of vocabulary depends on the child's motivation. And if you as a teacher, trainer, are only interested in teaching them to request and comment, food and toys and books, then that's a problem in your reinforcer assessment. We talk about SAM, social activity material. Material's part of it. If I walk into a classroom and I don't see activities as one of the reinforcers people are trying to assess, then that's a problem that overrides PECS, because you're going to have a lot of other training issues if you're only using food or toys to reinforce actions within that group.
And we're out of time.
Okay.
We hope to hear from all of you about whether or not you want us to continue to do this live streaming. We would love to continue it, but we don't want to force anybody. This will be available for watching later on today. When we finish here, we'll post the video. I don't know how long that takes or how much magic it requires, but we have our tech person here to help us with that. But keep in touch with us. I appreciate all of you joining us today. Those of you who joined us from outside the U.S., thank you, because you're in different time zones except for Canada, Ontario, parts of Canada. But we have people on from Japan and France, Portugal, and I know you guys, it's evening time for you. So thanks very, very much. Stay in touch with us. And again, check out our core vocabulary video being released at 3 o'clock New York time this afternoon.
Right.
Thanks,
Bye,
guys.
everybody.
Bye.